Now, in this lecture, let's talk about ethics in research. Okay, so these are all the terms that we are going to go over it. And okay, so let's get right into it. Okay, so what is ethics in research? Okay, so the American Psychological Association, or what we also know as APA, has a series of principle and ethical conducts. And this is also on the APA's website. So basically, the psychologists are bound by these principles and ethical standards. And even if you're not a member of the American Psychological Association, because basically, when you say that you are a psychologist, um, you are representing psychologists everywhere. Okay, it's not just, it doesn't really matter that if you are a member of the APA or not. If you say that you're a psychologist, you really are bound by these principles and ethical standards. Okay, now let's talk about what is a institutional approval. All right, so when it comes to the research and the ethics that are involved in them, having institutional approvals are really important. So it's up to each individual school to approve or reject the kind of research that you will be doing or not. Okay, now when it comes to the human subjects, the places that issue these kind of approvals are the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. Okay, now when it comes to animal subjects, it's going to be the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees, or a lot of people just call them IACUT. Okay, so these are just the ones that are responsible for human and animal subjects, respectively. Okay, now when it comes to the actual commencement of the research, you cannot do any kind of research without any IRB or IACUT approval. Otherwise, um, even when you're trying to publish the papers, the first thing that reviewers are going to look for is that whether or not it is an approved research, and now if it's not approved, is if the research has no IACUT or IRB approvals, they're not going to allow you to publish your research findings. Okay, so what do the IRB or the IACUT look for when they are evaluating your research proposal, as that we saw last time? Okay, what they are going to look for is something called, they're going to conduct something called the risk-benefit ratio. So basically, they're going to evaluate the risk and the benefit of the research project, and they kind of see the pros and cons, and they're going to really look at them and evaluate them and say that if this is worthwhile of proceeding. Okay, so if the pros outweigh the cons, they're going to proceed, and if the cons outweigh the pros, they are not going to proceed. Okay, now most of the research, if you justify it correctly and then say that why it is so significantly, why is it such a pressing matter that you must conduct this research, and how the findings of your research can really propel the good of the humankind and all that stuff. And that then most people, most places, the IRB or the ICA, they will allow you to conduct the research. Um, but if it kind of involves in, let's say if your research involves some sort of questionable methods, such as, let's say, electric shock to humans, or let's say something very cruel to the animals, then you really need to have a very good reason why this research is worth doing, especially if a similar research has been done in the past. So you really need to kind of justify why this research is worth doing and how the risk and the benefit ratio, how can the pros outweigh the cons? So you have to make your argument very well in this sense. Okay, now when it comes to the actual research, it is the psychologist's role to really protect the subject's wellness. So it includes all aspect of it, the mental, emotional, and the physical aspect. Now, there is something that we as psychologists will call it the minimal risk kind of danger. So this basically says that this research study uses a procedural activity that are kind of normal in everyday's life. So, for instance, if you have a subject that drink 2 cups of coffee and you want to test their attention, then this is something that a lot of people do on their everyday life. Okay, and therefore this will be considered as a minimal risk kind of when it comes to the danger levels. Now, there are something that are above the minimal risk. Okay, so let's say if you are trying to conduct a study to see whether or not a person, when he or she is under extreme anger, can make the wrong decision about something. Okay, so which means that you need to manipulate this person's anger level. Okay, and then what happens is that imagine if the your subjects that comes in is a somewhat of a person who may be in a having a history of a heart attack or having a history of hypertension or even worse had a history of like let's say a stroke, and then you're trying to manipulate their anger level in which that you are going to make them very angry. So then what happens that you are running a risk of having these people, well, having another stroke or having another heart attack. So that is something that is going to be above significant risk level. Okay, so then when you are doing this kind of research, when you propose this kind of research, then the IRB with the IRCUT, is they're going to look at, what is the rationale that this kind of above minimal risk that must be done. Okay, so, but most of the time, so the stuff that we're going to be doing in the class is going to be all minimal risk. So, and we, as a class, have already gotten the IRB approval to conduct all the studies that you are going to be doing in this class. So, there's no reason for you to worry about that. Okay, now let's take a look at dealing with risk. So, and now whether at risk or at minimal risk, research participants must be protected. Okay, and then so the more safeguard, usually the better. Okay, and when you are doing things that are becoming more risky, then you need to have more safeguards. So let's go back to our previous example in the sense that you are trying to manipulate a person's anger level, and let's say you're saying that we must do this kind of studies, and we cannot do this kind of study in normal healthy people because it's exactly this. You could, let's say if you hypothesize that it's exactly this kind of angry state that led these people to have a heart attack in the first place. Okay, so therefore your subject must be the people who have a history of heart attack. Okay, so let's say that's your hypothesis, and then so therefore you are trying to see manipulate the anger level in these particular subject uh, population. And then what happened is that then if you must go ahead with this kind of study, you need to kind of tell the IRB what kind of safeguard you are going to have. So let's say, for instance, you can say something like, we're going to have heart attack medications nearby. We will always have EMT nearby, and we will always have a doctor, a physician who is around in case if there needs to be any kind of emergency resuscitation that is available. So this kind of research, even though it's more at risk compared to a minimal risk kind of research, you can they might say that okay, because there are so many safeguards that are involved, and therefore they might think that these are the things that can really mitigate they can minimize the potential danger that it's going to cause the participants. Okay, now another example that we're giving you here, in a clinical trial of a drug, there should be physicians on board to give regular physicals as well as a free medical prevention or intervention in case the participants are not feeling well physically. And the same principle applies to other areas as well. So let's say, I'll give you another example. So let's say if you are interested in causing stress to a group of people, and let's say you know that you are going to cause them a temporary stress to these people, and then therefore you're kind of concerned about their mental well-being, and therefore you should have a clinical psychologist around just in case that these people, the participants that are participating in your study, really have some sort of mental meltdown or a mental breakdown. So your job is to have someone who can kind of control the situation there. So in this case, that would be a clinical psychologist. Okay. Okay, informed consent. Okay, so what is an informed consent? It's basically tells the, this is a document that basically tells the participants what are some of the potential risks that might influence the individual's willingness to participate in the study. Okay, so for instance, if you are interested in knowing if extreme temperature can alter your perception of pain, okay, and you propose to have people put their hands into ice cold water. Okay, now this is a potential risk. Now this is nothing more than a normal minimal risk, but this is still a potential risk. Okay, and so you need to tell your participants that in this study, you will be required to put your hands in ice cold bath for maximum of, let's say, 30 seconds. No, I mean whatever your methods is saying, and then and only after the participants agreed that and have identified that these are the potential risks, then you can go ahead and actually have them participate in the study, not before then. Okay, and so there there will need to be some sort of informed consent before you conduct the experiments. Okay, now the only exceptions is that if it's completely at minimal risks. So let's say if you're just using a computer program and it's kind of similar to your lab in this class, your lab number 123, and then you're just trying to click left or right, just something very simple that anybody can do, and it basically involves no potential danger, and therefore you would not need informed consent in this case. But if there are like other potential risks that a person can really come in contact with, you need to get your participants to sign an informed consent. Okay, now let's take a look at deception and debriefing. Okay, deception is intentionally withholding information about significant aspect of a research in order to protect, or in some cases they might present misinformation about the research to participants, and then sometimes deception must be used in order to protect the construct. Okay, and now this can be either done through omission or commission. Okay, omission just it's just kind of intentionally withholding information, and commission is basically misrepresenting information. You particularly misled the participants who think that okay, the purpose is that I'm here is I am here to have an interview, but in the real intention of the researchers is trying to see how you conform to other people under social pressure. Okay, now if they were to tell you that you are coming here to being a subject of to see if you can succumb to any social pressure and conform to a certain situation. Well, since you already know that, oh, I'm being studied for this, you are going to change your behavior and your reaction completely. Therefore, they must use deception in order to protect the construct they are trying to study. Okay, so that's that. So deception is sometimes allowed and sometimes even necessary depending on what you are trying to study. Okay, now since deception was used during the experiment, at the very end, when the participants are about to leave, when you kind of have gotten the data that you needed, you need to come clean, and that is what debriefing is. Okay, this is the process following a research session through which participants are informed about the rationale of the research in which they participated. So basically, when there are any kind of deceptions, then it needs to come through with some sort of debriefing. Okay, so the goal of the debriefing is to clear up any misconceptions and to leave participants with a positive feeling towards psychological research. So the purpose of the debriefing is to have the participants not to feel that I was lied to during the deception part, but it kind of allows the participants to understand that this deception, this prior deception, was needed in order to protect the research question in which the participants are helping the researchers trying to study. Now let's talk about clinical trials. Okay, clinical trials is, as you guys know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Okay, now it's unethical to withhold effective treatment for sick patients. Okay, so you should not give placebo controls. Now, so the easiest example is, let's say, cancer patients. Okay, cancer patients, so let's say if you are wondering if a drug, this new drug that just came out, whether or not if it's very effective, okay, well, you cannot use that. I mean, your subject then obviously would be all the patients that are diagnosed with whatever cancer that you're trying to treat, right? Now, you should not give them placebo control, because with placebo control to, let's say, cancer patients, and you're just basically giving them a bogus treatment, and what's going to happen to the cancer is going to get worse, right? So therefore, it's unethical to withhold effective treatment for sick participants. So what you should do instead is you should use one group that receives the current best treatment that has been approved by let's say the FDA, and the other group that receives the drug that is intended to um, that's intended as the new treatment to kind of exceed the best current available drug for them. So essentially, you will only have two groups. You will not have a placebo control group, but instead you will have something called a positive control group that is receiving the best current treatment, and the other group is going to be receiving this new drug. Okay. Now, it's also unethical to take away effective treatment. Okay, why is it unethical? Well, obviously, when a person is getting better and better, it's not right to take away effective treatment. Because especially when it comes to certain drugs, it's possible that once you take away these drugs and when you reintroduce them, it might not be so effective as the first time they take it. Okay, so it's not ethical to take away effective treatment. Okay, and another thing is you want to make sure that you have physicians and clinical psychologists on board your clinical trials. And then, okay, so, all right, so the last point I covered already, okay? So they give you the current best treatment versus a drug X that you're trying to develop. Okay, okay, ethics and research, even more. So scientific integrity this is really, really important. Okay, so why is it so important to make sure that you are not faking data? Okay, well, let me tell you the story about Sybil Bird. So, Sybil was a psychologist that kind of believes that there are genetics roles intelligence. And he published many papers kind of looking at there are genetic correlations when it comes to the intelligence, in which that he strongly believed that intelligence is just a trait of that coming from the genetics, which means that smart parents will give smart children. And this is kind of similar to, and when you kind of think about it, this is something that is kind of common sense. But then, what happened is that later on, a lot of people start to question Civil Bird's uh, integrity of the data, and that is because the correlation R, as you learned in statistics, right? So this is the Pearson's correlation. In Sybil Bird's case, there are many papers that has been published. They have exactly the same correlation R. And this is just statistically not possible. Okay, so it's very likely that Sybil, when he was they found this out after Sybil passed away, and so it's very highly possible that, well, those were probably fake data. Okay, and they also found co-authors um, in the paper that never existed. Okay, so that these are all very big big no-no, very big red flags that most likely there was some sort of scientific disintegrity in there. Now, obviously, it's not right to fake the data or fake the co-authors that never exists. Okay, so that's the first part that just um, a little tidbit that can I kind of give you about scientific integrity. All right, now the second one is you should protect the participants from pain and suffering. And this is the Tuskegee study, which I'm going to provide a YouTube link. You can look at it yourself. But this basically uh, is a case, not a case study, but this is a study which is trying to see what are the consequences of untreated syphilis. Okay, now the consequences of untreated syphilis in, let's say, in Caucasians was well known, and then there are a lot of case studies back in the Europe, in the Europe days. But what they did not know was what are the Tuskegee. Well, this is why it's called the Tuskegee study. This happened in Tuskegee. What they did not know is that how it would kind of be followed in African Americans. So they, well, I'm not gonna give the story away, but you can just watch the YouTube, and you can see that this is a really, really unethical study. Okay. All right. Let's get on to the next one. Okay. So the very last part, let's go to your workbook and read through the ethics critique. And then there are three of them. And at the very end, after you read them, can you just go on to the discussion board and post what you think was unethical about each situation? Okay, and that's it for today, for this lecture.